My name is Victoria Sterling, and I'm 28 years old. 2 hours before my dream wedding ceremony, I walked into the bridal suite at our elegant venue and found my younger sister Marlene wearing my custom $8,000 wedding dress and my grandmother's priceless diamond earrings. When I demanded she take them off, my mother Beverly just shrugged and said, "Let her feel special, it's just for photos." That's when I gave them one warning that would change everything. I told them to remove my dress and earrings immediately, or I would cancel the entire wedding. They all laughed at me, thinking I was bluffing. They had no idea what I was actually capable of when pushed too far. Before we dive into this incredible wedding disaster story, I'd love to know where you're watching from and if you've ever dealt with family drama at your own special events. Please hit that like button if you're ready for some serious family boundary setting, and don't forget to subscribe because this story has twists that will leave you speechless. Trust me, you won't believe how I handled this situation. Growing up as the older daughter in the Sterling family meant living in the shadow of my younger sister Marlene from the day she was born. My parents, Beverly and Frank, never tried to hide their obvious favoritism. While I was studying hard to get good grades and working part-time jobs to save money for college, Marlene was getting the bigger bedroom, the designer clothes, and all the attention at family gatherings. Throughout high school, I maintained a 4.0 grade point average and graduated as valedictorian, but the celebration dinner was cut short because Marlene had a cheerleading competition the next day that required everyone's focus. When I earned a full scholarship to Northwestern University for business, my parents seemed more concerned about how they would manage Marlene's social calendar without my help with transportation. College was my escape from the family dynamics that had defined my entire childhood. For the first time in my life, I was judged on my own merits, rather than constantly compared to my sister's social popularity. I threw myself into my studies and internships, building a successful career in marketing that would eventually lead me to my dream job at a Fortune 500 company. At 25, I met David Richardson at a professional networking event downtown. He was an architect with his own firm, Intelligent Kind, and completely different from the guys I had dated in college. What struck me most about David was how he listened when I talked, really listened, instead of waiting for his turn to speak. He was genuinely interested in my career goals and supported my ambitions without trying to compete or diminish them. When I brought David home to meet my family, something unprecedented happened. My parents actually seemed impressed. David's successful architectural firm, his family's social connections, and his obvious financial stability caught their attention in a way that my own achievements never had. For the first time in my adult life, I felt like I had brought something valuable to the family dynamic. David and I dated for 2.5 years before he proposed, and during that time, he became increasingly aware of the family patterns I had grown up accepting as normal. He would point out how conversations always seemed to center around Marlene's latest drama or social plans, while my professional achievements were mentioned briefly and then forgotten. He helped me recognize that the treatment I had normalized wasn't healthy or fair. The engagement happened on a perfect autumn evening at the lakefront park, where we had our first official date. David had planned everything beautifully with photographers hidden to capture the moment, and both our families waiting at a nearby restaurant to celebrate. When we arrived at dinner and shared our news, my parents were more excited about the social status of planning a wedding than they were about my happiness. Planning our wedding became the project I had been waiting for my entire life. Finally, I would be the center of attention, the star of my own special day. I started dreaming about the perfect dress, the elegant venue, and the magical moment when all eyes would be on David and me as we promised to spend our lives together. After months of research and shopping, I found my dream wedding dress at an exclusive bridal boutique downtown. It was a stunning custom creation with hand-beaded lace, a cathedral train, and delicate pearl buttons up the back. The price tag was $8,000 more than I had ever spent on anything, but I had been saving for this moment since I started working full-time. My grandmother Rose had passed away 2 years before David and I got engaged, but she had always promised that her diamond earrings would be mine on my wedding day. They were beautiful antique pieces that had been in our family for 4 generations, and wearing them would make me feel connected to the strong women who had come before me. For the first few months of wedding planning, everything seemed to be going smoothly. My parents were helpful with vendor recommendations. David's family was generous with both time and financial contributions, and even Marlene seemed genuinely excited about being part of the celebration. I began to believe that this wedding would finally be the moment when I felt truly valued and celebrated by my own family. But as the wedding date grew closer, small signs of trouble began to appear that I was too hopeful and excited to recognize as warning signals of the disaster that was coming. The first red flag appeared during one of our dress shopping appointments, when Marlene made a comment that should have set off alarm bells in my mind. As I was modeling potential dresses for my mother and maid of honor, Janet Marlene casually mentioned how she would love to have something similar for her own future wedding. At the time, I thought it was sweet that she was inspired by my choices, but looking back, I can see it was the beginning of her plan to insert herself into my special day. My parents began dropping subtle hints that Marlene should be more involved in the wedding planning process. They would say things like, "You should ask Marlene what she thinks about the flowers," or "Maybe Marlene has some good ideas about the reception music." I initially dismissed these suggestions, explaining that my best friend Janet was my maid of honor and primary planning partner, but the pressure continued to build. Marlene started showing up uninvited to vendor meetings, claiming she just happened to be in the area when I was meeting with the photographer or florist. She would offer suggestions and improvements to choices I had already made, often contradicting decisions that David and I had carefully discussed and finalized. Her input was usually phrased as helpful advice, but it felt more like criticism of my judgment and taste. The engagement party that my parents hosted became another preview of problems to come. Despite my specific request that guests wear cocktail attire and jewel tones, Marlene showed up in a flowing white dress that could have easily been mistaken for a casual wedding gown. She positioned herself prominently in photos and monopolized conversations with David's family, introducing herself as the wedding planning sister who was helping coordinate everything. David pulled me aside during the engagement party to express his concern about the family dynamics he was witnessing. He had grown up in a family where boundaries were respected and individual achievements were celebrated, so the Sterling family patterns were both obvious and troubling to him. I defended my family out of habit, but privately, I was beginning to feel uncomfortable about the direction things were heading. The situation escalated when Marlene directly challenged my choice of Janet as maid of honor. She approached me with tears in her eyes, saying it was traditional for sisters to be each other's maids of honor and that she felt hurt and excluded by my decision. When I gently explained that Janet had been my best friend since college and had earned the honor through years of support and loyalty, Marlene accused me of valuing friendship over family. My parents immediately sided with Marlene, launching a coordinated campaign to pressure me into changing my wedding party lineup. They used their classic manipulation tactics, alternating between guilt trips about family loyalty and threats about how disappointed Grandmother Rose would have been if she knew I was excluding my own sister from such an important role. The emotional pressure was intense and familiar. I stood firm on keeping Janet as my maid of honor, but I agreed to make Marlene a bridesmaid as a compromise. Even this concession wasn't enough for my sister, who continued to push for more prominent roles and responsibilities in the ceremony. She suggested that we should have a dual bouquet toss since she was single and looking for love. She proposed a shared first dance with our parents, since the wedding was bringing the whole family together for celebration. The breaking point of this phase came when I discovered that Marlene had been telling her friends and social media followers that she was practically planning the whole wedding and serving as my co-maid of honor. She was positioning herself as an equal partner in my wedding rather than a supportive family member, and her behavior was becoming increasingly bold and entitled. During one particularly uncomfortable family dinner, Marlene announced her latest idea. She thought it would be beautiful if we both walked down the aisle together, since we were both single when we started planning and now one of us was getting married. The suggestion was so outrageous that David actually choked on his water, but my parents nodded thoughtfully as if it were a reasonable proposal. I realized that my family saw my wedding not as my special day, but as Marlene's opportunity to share in spotlight and attention that she felt she deserved. The woman who had been the center of attention our entire childhood was not willing to step back and let me have one day that was truly about my happiness and celebration. As my wedding day approached, Marlene's demands and manipulations became increasingly outrageous and difficult to ignore. She had moved beyond subtle suggestions and was now making direct demands about changes to my ceremony and reception plans. Her latest campaign focused on convincing my parents that the wedding should reflect the importance of family unity rather than just celebrating David and me as a couple. Marlene's emotional manipulation reached new heights when she staged a tearful breakdown at Sunday family dinner, claiming that she felt excluded from the most important event in our family's recent history. She sobbed about how much the wedding meant to her, how she had always dreamed of sharing this kind of magical experience with her sister, and how hurt she was that I seemed to care more about impressing David's family than including my own. My parents fell for the performance, completely launching into their familiar lecture about family loyalty and the importance of making sure everyone felt valued and included. They reminded me that this wedding was bringing our entire extended family together for the first time in years and suggested that I had a responsibility to make the event meaningful for everyone, not just myself and David. The pressure intensified when Marlene began suggesting specific changes that would give her a more prominent role in the ceremony itself. She proposed that we should have matching bouquets since she would be walking down the aisle before me, and the flowers should coordinate. She suggested that the photographer should take formal portraits of both of us in our dresses, since we were both representing the Sterling family women at this important event. My breaking point during this phase came when I arrived at the bridal boutique for my final dress fitting and found Marlene there ahead of me, actually trying on my custom wedding gown. The seamstress looked uncomfortable and apologetic, explaining that my mother had called ahead and requested that Marlene be allowed to try the dress on, just to see how it looked, and to help with final adjustments. Standing in that fitting room watching my sister pose and preen in the dress I had dreamed about and saved for, I felt a level of rage and violation that I had never experienced before. This wasn't about sharing or family bonding, this was about Marlene's need to insert herself into every aspect of my special day. The seamstress could see my distress and quickly helped Marlene out of the dress, but the damage was done. When I confronted my parents about the dress-fitting incident, they dismissed my concerns as pre-wedding stress and perfectionism. They suggested that I was being selfish and unreasonable, and that allowing Marlene to try on the dress was a harmless way to make her feel included in the wedding preparations. Their complete inability to understand why this violated my boundaries made me realize how deep the family dysfunction actually ran. David's family began expressing concern about the unusual dynamics they were witnessing during wedding planning meetings and family gatherings. His mother, Patricia, pulled me aside after a particularly uncomfortable dinner at my parents' house and gently asked if everything was okay with my family relationships. She had never seen anything like the Sterling family dynamic and was worried about how it might affect David and me as newlyweds. The social media situation became another source of stress as Marlene began posting photos and updates that positioned her as co-star of the wedding planning process. Her Instagram followers were commenting about how lucky she was to have such a close sister, who included her in everything and asking when her own wedding would be happening. She was building a public narrative that made my wedding about both of us, rather than about David and me. Extended family members began calling with questions about Marlene's prominent role in the wedding, since her social media posts made it seem like she was serving as co-maid of honor or even co-bride. I found myself having awkward conversations with aunts and cousins who were confused about why Marlene seemed to be featured so prominently in what should have been my celebration. My best friend Janet became increasingly concerned about the family pressure I was facing and the toll it was taking on my mental health. She had watched me struggle with Sterling family dynamics since college, but the wedding situation was worse than anything she had seen before. She strongly encouraged me to set firmer boundaries, but I was still hoping that my family would recognize how inappropriate their behavior was and back down on their own. The final straw of this escalation phase came when I discovered that my parents had been making plans behind my back that would fundamentally change my wedding ceremony without my knowledge or consent. What I learned 2 days before the wedding would lead to the most dramatic confrontation of my entire life. The morning of my wedding day was supposed to be magical, filled with excitement, anticipation, and the joy of finally marrying the man I loved. Instead, it became the most shocking and heartbreaking day of my relationship with my family. I arrived at the elegant bridal suite at our venue at 9 in the morning, expecting to spend the next few hours getting ready with my bridesmaids and enjoying the calm before the beautiful ceremony we had planned so carefully. Walking through the door of the bridal suite, I was expecting to see Janet and my other bridesmaids laying out accessories and preparing for hair and makeup. Instead, I was greeted by a sight that made my blood run cold and my heart stop beating. There was Marlene standing in front of the full-length mirror, wearing my custom $8,000 wedding dress and my grandmother's irreplaceable diamond earrings. She looked absolutely stunning, which somehow made the betrayal even more devastating. The dress fit her perfectly since we were nearly the same size, and she had already had her hair and makeup professionally done. She was posing and admiring herself, completely absorbed in her reflection, as if this were the most natural thing in the world. My mother Beverly was sitting calmly in a chair nearby, sipping coffee, and watching Marlene with obvious pride and satisfaction. When she saw my shocked expression, she smiled warmly and said, "Doesn't she look beautiful? She just wanted to feel the magic of your special day. It's just for some pre-ceremony photos, sweetheart. Don't worry, she'll change before the actual wedding starts." The casual tone of my mother's explanation was almost as shocking as seeing Marlene in my dress. She spoke as if this were a minor harmless request, rather than a complete violation of my boundaries and the theft of my most precious wedding day symbols. Her inability to understand why I would be upset revealed just how deep the family dysfunction actually ran. Marlene turned from the mirror with a smug smile that I had seen countless times throughout our childhood, whenever she had successfully gotten something that belonged to me. She said, "I look better in it anyway. Don't you think? The color really brings out my eyes and the style is perfect for my figure. You chose well, big sister." The comment was designed to hurt me, and it succeeded completely. Here was my sister wearing the dress I had dreamed about and saved for suggesting that she was more deserving of it than I was. The cruelty was breathtaking, and the fact that my mother was supporting this behavior made it even more devastating. I took a deep breath and delivered what I thought would be a reasonable ultimatum. "Take off my dress and my grandmother's earrings right now, or I'm canceling this entire wedding." I spoke calmly and clearly, hoping they would recognize that I was serious and comply with my completely reasonable demand. Instead of the shock and immediate compliance I expected, my entire family burst into laughter. My mother chuckled and said, "Oh, honey, you're being ridiculous. It's just a dress, and she'll take it off in a few minutes. Don't be such a perfectionist about everything." My father Frank, who had been standing quietly in the corner, nodded in agreement and suggested that I was overreacting due to pre-wedding nerves. Marlene's response was the most infuriating of all. She laughed and said, "You're not going to cancel your wedding over this, Victoria. David's family is already here. The photographer is waiting and everyone is expecting a beautiful ceremony. Stop being so dramatic and let me have this one little moment." That's when I discovered the full extent of their betrayal. My mother explained that they had arranged a special surprise for the ceremony. Both Marlene and I would walk down the aisle together as sister brides, representing the unity and love of the Sterling family. The photographer had already been briefed on shooting this sister wedding theme, and several family members were expecting to see both daughters featured prominently in the ceremony. The revelation that my parents had planned to fundamentally change my wedding ceremony without my knowledge or consent was the final betrayal. This wasn't about Marlene trying on my dress for photos. This was about hijacking my entire wedding day and turning it into her spotlight moment. They had been planning this deception for weeks, maybe months, while pretending to support my vision for the ceremony. I pulled out my phone and sent David an emergency text. "Come to bridal suite immediately. Major crisis." may need to postpone everything. Within minutes, my wonderful fiancé was knocking on the door, and when he saw Marlene in my wedding dress, his face went completely white with shock and anger. David immediately understood the situation and offered his complete support for whatever decision I wanted to make. He said, "Victoria, this is supposed to be our day, our commitment to each other. If your family can't respect that, then we'll find another way to celebrate our love. I'm with you completely no matter what you decide to do." Standing in that bridal suite surrounded by the people who were supposed to love and support me most, I realized that my entire family had betrayed me in the most devastating way possible. But I also realized that I had the power to stop this manipulation and finally stand up for myself in a way I had never done before. Looking around that bridal suite, seeing my sister in my wedding dress, and my family's complete inability to understand why this was wrong, I made a decision that would change my relationship with them forever. If they wanted to play games with my wedding day, then I would show them exactly what the consequences of their actions would be. I spoke with a calm, steady voice that surprised even me. "Fine, Marlene? You want to be a bride today? Congratulations. You can be the only bride because I'm calling off this entire ceremony right now." The room went completely silent as they realized I was serious about my threat to cancel the wedding. My first call was to Jessica, our wedding planner, who was coordinating final details in the main reception area. I explained that we needed to halt all ceremony preparations immediately due to a family emergency and that guests should be informed that the wedding was postponed indefinitely. Jessica was professional and supportive, having handled family drama at weddings before, and she immediately began implementing our emergency protocol. Next, I called Reverend Miller, who was scheduled to perform our ceremony in just 2 hours. I explained the situation briefly and asked him to make an announcement to any guests who had already arrived, stating that the ceremony was postponed due to unexpected family circumstances. He was understanding and offered to help communicate with guests as needed. My parents' reaction was immediate panic as they realized I was actually following through on my threat. My mother started crying and pleading, saying I was ruining the most important day of our family's life over something insignificant. My father demanded that I stop being childish and compromise with my sister, as if wearing my wedding dress without permission was a reasonable request that deserved accommodation. David immediately supported my decision with unwavering loyalty. He put his arm around me and addressed my parents directly. "Beverly and Frank, what you've done here is completely unacceptable. This is Victoria's wedding day, not a family reunion or a photo opportunity for Marlene. If you can't respect basic boundaries, then we'll celebrate our marriage with people who actually love and support us." Marlene's reaction was the most telling of all. Instead of apologizing or showing any remorse for her behavior, she became angry that her plan had backfired. She said, "You can't cancel your whole wedding just because I wanted to take a few photos in your dress. Everyone will think you're crazy and David's family will never understand why you're being so unreasonable." I calmly walked over to Marlene and personally removed my grandmother's diamond earrings from her ears. She tried to resist, but I was firm and determined. These earrings represented 4 generations of strong, sterling women, and I would not allow them to be part of Marlene's manipulative performance. She could keep the dress on if she wanted, but the family heirlooms were coming with me. The photographer arrived at the bridal suite confused about the mixed messages he was receiving regarding the sister wedding theme he had been secretly briefed on. When he saw the tension in the room and my obvious distress, he immediately understood that he had been caught in the middle of a family conflict. I explained that there would be no photography session and no ceremony today, and he was very professional about packing up his equipment. Word of the ceremony cancellation spread quickly through our guest list, and the reactions were revealing about who truly supported David and me versus who was just there for the social event. David's family immediately offered their complete support and asked how they could help us through this difficult situation. My extended family members began asking questions about what had really happened since the official explanation of family emergency seemed inadequate. I made the decision to be honest with close family and friends about why the wedding had been canceled. I wasn't going to protect my parents and Marlene by keeping their betrayal secret, and I wanted people to understand that this wasn't a case of cold feet or normal pre-wedding jitters. The response was overwhelmingly supportive, with several relatives expressing shock at my parents' behavior. Marlene made one final desperate attempt to salvage her plan by suggesting that we could still have the ceremony with her as a co-bride, since she was already dressed and ready. The audacity of this suggestion was breathtaking, but it confirmed that she had no understanding of how inappropriate her behavior had been. She truly believed that she deserved to share my wedding day spotlight. My parents tried various manipulation tactics to convince me to change my mind, from guilt trips about disappointing the extended family to threats about the financial waste of canceling such an expensive event. Nothing they said carried any weight with me, because I had finally reached the point where their opinions and approval no longer mattered more than my own self-respect. The final conversation I had with my family that day was brief and definitive. I told them that the wedding would happen when they learned to respect boundaries and treat me with the dignity I deserved. Until they could acknowledge how wrong their behavior had been and make genuine changes, David and I would celebrate our marriage surrounded by people who actually loved and supported us. Walking out of that bridal suite in my regular clothes, carrying my grandmother's earrings, and leaving my family to deal with the consequences of their choices, I felt a mixture of sadness and liberation that I had never experienced before. The woman who had spent 28 years trying to earn their approval had finally found the strength to demand the respect she deserved. The immediate aftermath of canceling my wedding was both devastating and surprisingly liberating. As news of the cancellation spread through our extended family and social circles, the real story of what had happened began to emerge, and the response was overwhelmingly supportive of David and me. My Aunt Helen, my mother's older sister, was among the first to reach out with support and understanding. She admitted that she had been concerned about my parents' behavior during the wedding planning process, particularly their obvious favoritism toward Marlene, and their inability to let me have my own special moment. She shared stories about similar patterns she had observed throughout our childhood that validated my experience. Social media became an unexpected battleground as the true story of the wedding cancellation spread. Several family members who had witnessed Marlene's behavior during the planning process began sharing their own observations and expressing their shock at what my parents had allowed to happen. The narrative that I was being unreasonable or dramatic quickly collapsed as more people understood the full extent of the betrayal. Marlene's own social media presence became a source of embarrassment for her as friends and followers began questioning her role in the wedding disaster. Her previous posts about being involved in wedding planning now looked manipulative and self-serving in light of what had actually happened. Several of her friends privately reached out to me to express their disapproval of her behavior. My parents faced immediate social consequences in their own community as the story spread. Their church congregation, their neighborhood friends, and their social circle all learned about their role in sabotaging their own daughter's wedding. The shame and embarrassment they experienced was a natural consequence of their actions, and several people expressed their shock at such inappropriate behavior from parents. David's family response was everything I could have hoped for, and more. His parents, Patricia and Robert, immediately offered to host an intimate wedding ceremony at their beautiful estate, with only close friends and family members who truly supported our marriage. They were appalled by my family's behavior and wanted to ensure that David and I could still have the wedding celebration we deserved. The legal implications of the wedding cancellation turned out to be minimal thanks to Jessica, our wedding planner's experience with similar situations. Most of our vendors were understanding about the family emergency and either refunded our deposits or allowed us to reschedule without penalty fees. The few financial losses we incurred were worth the cost of establishing boundaries with my family. 3 weeks after the original wedding date, I received a call from my mother attempting to arrange a reconciliation meeting. She claimed that the family missed me and wanted to work things out, but her proposed solution was that I should apologize to Marlene for overreacting and embarrassing the family. There was no acknowledgement of wrongdoing, no genuine apology, and no indication that they understood why their behavior had been inappropriate. I declined the meeting and explained that any reconciliation would require genuine acknowledgement of what they had done wrong, sincere apologies for their behavior, and demonstrated changes in how they treated me going forward. Until those conditions were met, David and I would continue to maintain no contact with family members who couldn't respect basic boundaries. The most surprising development came when my grandmother's lawyer contacted me about a provision in her will that I had never known existed. Apparently, Grandmother Rose had been aware of the family dynamics and had included specific language stating that her diamond earrings were to go to me alone with the condition that they never be borrowed, shared, or given to other family members without my express consent. Marlene's wearing of the earrings on my wedding day had actually violated the legal terms of the inheritance. This revelation provided additional validation that my grandmother had understood and disapproved of my parents' favoritism toward Marlene. It also gave me legal backing for my decision to remove the earrings from Marlene's possession, since she had been wearing them without my permission in direct violation of the inheritance terms. My professional life actually improved as a result of the wedding crisis, as colleagues and clients who learned about the situation expressed admiration for my strength in standing up to family manipulation. My boss commented that the leadership qualities I had demonstrated during this personal crisis indicated I was ready for additional responsibilities and career advancement opportunities. David and I grew closer throughout this difficult period as he saw me demonstrate strength and independence that impressed him even more than my professional achievements had. He told me that watching me stand up to my family's manipulation made him love and respect me even more, and that he was proud to be marrying a woman with such strong personal boundaries and self-respect. The experience taught me that sometimes the people who claim to love us most are actually the ones who will hurt us deepest when they don't get what they want from us. But it also showed me that real love involves supporting someone's boundaries rather than trying to manipulate them into compliance. 3 months after the original wedding disaster, David and I celebrated our marriage in the most beautiful, intimate ceremony I could have ever imagined. Patricia and Robert Richardson had transformed their estate garden into a fairy tale wedding venue, complete with white roses, string lights, and an altar overlooking the lake, where David and I had shared so many meaningful conversations during our courtship. The guest list was small but perfect, including only people who genuinely loved and supported our relationship. Janet served as my maid of honor with pride and joy. David's brother Michael was his best man, and we were surrounded by friends and family members who understood that this day was about celebrating our commitment to each other, rather than anyone else's need for attention or drama. I wore the same custom wedding dress that had caused so much trouble, but now it felt truly mine in a way it never had before. My grandmother's diamond earrings sparkled in the afternoon sunlight, and I could feel the strength and love of the sterling women who had worn them before me. Most importantly, I was wearing them by choice, surrounded by people who respected my right to make that choice. The ceremony itself was everything David and I had dreamed of when we first got engaged. Reverend Miller, who had been so understanding about the original cancellation, performed a beautiful service that focused on our love story and our commitment to building a life together based on mutual respect and support. There were tears of joy, heartfelt vows, and a sense of celebration that had been completely missing from the stress of the original wedding planning. 2 weeks before our rescheduled wedding, I received a surprise phone call from my mother. Her tone was different from previous conversations, less demanding and more genuinely remorseful. She explained that the social consequences of their behavior had been more severe than they had anticipated, and that several family members had confronted them about their treatment of me during the wedding planning process. More importantly, my parents had begun seeing a family therapist who specialized in dysfunctional family dynamics and favoritism patterns. The therapist had helped them understand how their lifelong preference for Marlene had damaged both daughters and created unhealthy relationship patterns that needed to be addressed. For the first time in my adult life, my mother was taking responsibility for her behavior rather than making excuses. The apology my mother offered was genuine and specific. She acknowledged that allowing Marlene to wear my dress and earrings had been completely inappropriate, that planning to change my ceremony without my consent was a serious violation of my boundaries, and that their pattern of favoritism had been unfair and hurtful throughout my childhood and adult life. She asked if there was any possibility of rebuilding our relationship on healthier terms. I was cautious but hopeful about the possibility of reconciliation. I explained that any renewed relationship would need to be built slowly with consistent demonstration of changed behavior, rather than just verbal apologies. I also made it clear that David and I were a package deal, and that any future relationship with my family would need to include respect for my husband and our marriage. Marlene's response to the family therapy process was more mixed. She eventually acknowledged that her behavior during my wedding planning had been inappropriate and selfish, but her apology felt less genuine than my parents' efforts at change. She seemed more sorry about the social consequences she had faced, rather than truly understanding how she had hurt me. However, she did agree to respect boundaries going forward and to work on changing her patterns of entitlement and manipulation. The rescheduled wedding celebration was everything the original event should have been. Our guests were genuinely happy for us. The atmosphere was relaxed and joyful, and David and I were able to focus on each other rather than managing family drama. The photos from that day show two people who are genuinely in love and surrounded by supportive community. My career continued to flourish as I applied the boundary-setting skills I had learned during the wedding crisis to my professional relationships. I was promoted to senior marketing director within 6 months of our wedding, and my confidence in standing up for myself translated into more effective leadership and client relationships. The experience had taught me that respecting myself was the foundation for earning respect from others. David and I established new family traditions that honored both our backgrounds while creating space for our own values and priorities. We hosted intimate holiday gatherings that focused on gratitude and connection, rather than drama and competition. We also made it a priority to support friends who were dealing with their own toxic family situations, having learned how important it is to have people in your life who will support your boundaries rather than pressure you to compromise them. On our first wedding anniversary, David and I created a tradition of celebrating both our wedding day and what we privately called Boundary Day, the anniversary of my decision to cancel the original wedding rather than allow my family to violate my boundaries. We used the day to reflect on the strength we found during that crisis and to recommit to supporting each other's individual growth and mutual respect. The experience taught me that protecting your special moments isn't selfish. It's necessary for maintaining your self-respect and the health of your relationships. Sometimes you have to be willing to lose everything to gain the respect you deserve, because real family will support your boundaries instead of trying to cross them. Most importantly, I learned that your wedding day, like your life, belongs to you, and you have every right to protect it from people who would use it for their own purposes rather than celebrating your happiness. Today, David and I have been married for 3 years, and we have a beautiful life built on mutual respect, genuine support, and healthy boundaries. My relationship with my parents has slowly improved as they continue working on changing their behavioral patterns, while my relationship with Marlene remains cordial but distant. The most important lesson I learned is that sometimes the greatest act of love for yourself and your real family is refusing to accept treatment that diminishes your worth or steals your joy. Have you ever had to set difficult boundaries with family members who tried to take over your special moments? How did you handle relatives who couldn't respect your choices during important life events? Share your experiences in the comments below, because your story might help someone else who is struggling with similar family dynamics. If this wedding disaster story resonated with you, please give it a like and subscribe for more real-life tales about standing up for yourself and creating the life you deserve. Don't forget to share this video with anyone who might need encouragement to protect their own boundaries and special moments. Thank you for listening to my story, and I hope it reminds you that you deserve to be celebrated and respected by the people in your life, especially during your most important moments. Here's to finding the courage to protect your joy and surround yourself with people who genuinely want to see you happy.